They left her to freeze while they partied. They didn't know the Duke was coming for her. Her family thought the freezing storage room would silence her forever. But while they danced, a furious Duke was hunting for the woman he couldn't forget. He didn't just break down the door. He destroyed their entire world to save her. Craving more satisfying revenge and swoon-worthy rescues? Subscribe now for the best stories you won't find anywhere else. London in January of 1819 was not just cold, it was brutal. It slammed against the windows of Wickham House like handfuls of gravel. Inside, the house was usually warm, but for Lady Eleanor Wickham, it felt like living inside an iceberg. Eleanor stood in the hallway, her hands clasped tightly together to stop them from shaking. She wasn't shaking from the cold, not yet anyway. She was shaking from nerves. Tonight was the grand charity gala. It was the most important event of the winter season. Her father, the late Lord Wickham, had been one of the founders of this charity. He used to tell her that it was their duty to help those who had less, even when the snow was deep and the wind was howling. But her father was gone, and the house that had once been full of laughter and warmth was now ruled by her stepmother, Mrs. Agatha Wickham. The door to the drawing room opened, and Agatha stepped out. She looked perfect, in a terrifying sort of way. Her dress was stiff silk, and her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. Behind her came Eleanor's stepsisters, Mary Ann and Judith. They were giggling, a sound that reminded Eleanor of glass breaking. They were dressed in bright, expensive colors, Mary Ann in a ruby red that clashed with her pale skin, and Judith in a sharp, icy blue. Eleanor looked down at her own dress. It was gray, plain, and worn at the hem. She had spent hours trying to make it look presentable, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would let her come along. "Eleanor," Agatha said, "I was only waiting to see if you needed assistance before the carriage arrives," Eleanor said, her voice quiet. "And I thought perhaps I might accompany you. Father always wanted the whole family to attend the gala." Mary Ann covered her mouth to hide a smirk. Judith didn't bother hiding hers. Agatha sighed. A long, dramatic sound. "Oh, Eleanor. Always thinking of what your father wanted. Never thinking about reality. Look at you, you are mousy, pale, and that dress is an embarrassment. The Duke of Ashford will be there tonight. Do you really think we want to present you to a duke?" The mention of the Duke made Eleanor's stomach twist. Everyone knew of Alexander Hawthorne, the Duke of Ashford. He was wealthy, powerful, and supposedly very serious. He wasn't the type of man who suffered fools lightly. "It would be cruel to take you," Judith said, leaning in. Her voice was fake sweet, like sugar poured over a lemon. "You would be a laughingstock. We are only protecting you, truly." "So it is settled," Agatha said, pulling on her gloves. "You will stay here. The servants have been given the night off to attend their own gathering in the village, so you will be alone. Try not to cause any trouble." Eleanor felt a stinging sensation behind her eyes, but she refused to cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Yes, stepmother?" she whispered. Agatha turned to leave, her heavy skirts swishing on the floor. But just as Eleanor turned to go to her room, Mary Ann grabbed her arm. "Wait," Mary Ann said. "Eleanor, be a dear. Stepmama asked us to bring the old lanterns. You know, the pretty ones Father bought for the autumn festival? We want to donate them to the charity auction tonight." Eleanor frowned. "The lanterns? But they are in the old storage room at the back of the house. No one has been in there for months." "Exactly," Judith said, stepping up beside her sister. "You know where everything is. We don't want to get dust on our gowns. Just run and fetch them for us. Quickly now, the carriage is waiting." Eleanor hesitated. Something felt wrong. The storage room was in the oldest part of the house, past the servants' quarters, where the heating didn't reach. It was basically a stone box, but if she refused, Agatha would yell, and the night would end in an argument. "Fine," Eleanor said. "I'll get them." She walked down the long, dark corridor toward the back of the house. The air grew colder with every step. The fancy rugs disappeared, replaced by bare stone floors. She reached the heavy oak door of the storage room. It smelled of damp wood and old memories. She stepped inside. The room was dark, lit only by the faint moonlight coming through a high, barred window. The lanterns, she muttered to herself. Looking around, she saw stacks of old crates, dusty paintings, and broken chairs. But she didn't see any lanterns. She turned back toward the door. "Marianne? I don't see them." Slam. The heavy door swung shut with a violence that shook the floor. Eleanor rushed forward, grabbing the iron handle. She pulled. It didn't move. Then she heard it. The distinct, metallic click-clack of the heavy deadbolt sliding into place from the outside. "Marianne! Judith!" Eleanor shouted, pounding on the wood. "Open the door. This isn't funny." From the other side of the door, she heard muffled laughter. "We told you we were protecting you." Judith's voice came through the wood, sounding distant. "Now you won't embarrass us. Enjoy your quiet evening, Eleanor," Marianne giggled. Then there was the sound of footsteps hurrying away, click, 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 fading into silence. Eleanor stood frozen. The silence of the house crashed down on her. She was locked in a stone room in the middle of a blizzard. The servants were gone. Her family was leaving. No one knew she was here. She pressed her ear against the door, holding her breath, hoping they were joking. She waited for the sound of the bolt sliding back. She waited for footsteps returning. But there was only the wind howling outside, and the creeping, biting cold beginning to seep through the soles of her thin shoes. She was alone. Time moved differently in the dark. At first, Eleanor was angry. She paced the small room, kicking at the crates and shouting until her throat felt raw. She imagined Agatha's smug face and the stepsisters' cruel laughter. Anger was good. Anger kept her warm. It made her blood pump faster, but anger requires energy, and the cold was a thief. It stole her energy, bit by bit. After what felt like an hour, the anger faded into fear. The temperature in the room was dropping rapidly. This part of the house wasn't insulated. The stone walls radiated ice. She could see her breath in the moonlight, little puffs of white fog that vanished as quickly as they appeared. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to rub friction into her sleeves. Her gray dress was thin, made for indoor wear, not for an unheated storage locker in the middle of January. "Think, Eleanor, think," she whispered. Her teeth were starting to chatter. She looked around for something to cover herself with. She opened a crate, hoping for old curtains or blankets. Instead, she found stacks of old porcelain dishes. Useless. She opened another. Books. She dragged a heavy canvas tarp off a stack of furniture and tried to wrap it around her shoulders. But the canvas was stiff and smelled of mildew. It offered almost no warmth. She slid down against the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. The cold wasn't just on her skin anymore. It was moving inside her. Her fingers felt stiff and clumsy. Her toes were numb. "Father," she whispered into the darkness, "I don't know what to do." She closed her eyes. It would be so easy to just sleep. The shivering was exhausting. Her body felt heavy, like she was wearing a suit of armor. She thought about the gala. By now, the music would be playing. The chandeliers would be glowing with 1,000 candles. People would be eating warm soup and drinking hot cider. Marianne and Judith would be dancing, smiling their fake smiles, telling everyone that poor Eleanor had a headache and decided to stay in bed. No one would miss her. That was the coldest thought of all, colder than the ice on the window. If she froze here tonight, would anyone even care? Minutes turned into hours. The moonlight shifted across the floor. Eleanor's shivering became violent, racking her whole body, and then it stopped. That was worse. She knew enough to know that when you stop shivering, you are in real trouble. Her thoughts became slow and syrupy. She let her head rest against the wooden crate. She was drifting away. Thump, 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 thump. The sound was faint, muffled by the snow and the stone walls, but it was rhythmic. Thump, 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 thump. Hoofbeats. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. A horse? Who would be coming here now? The family was gone. The servants were gone. Then came a louder sound, the heavy knocker on the front door of the estate. Bang, bang, bang. Silence. Then, voices. Not the high-pitched giggles of her sisters, but a deep, commanding voice. It echoed faintly through the empty hallways of the house. The person wasn't just knocking. They had entered. The front door must have been left unlocked by her careless stepfamily. Is anyone present? The voice roared. It sounded angry. I saw the lights. I know someone is here. Eleanor tried to yell, but her throat was dry and tight. Help! She croaked. It was barely a whisper. She coughed and tried again. Here, the footsteps were heavy. Boots on wood. They were moving fast, purposeful. They weren't wandering aimlessly. They were searching. Hello? The voice was closer now. It was deep, rich, and filled with a strange urgency. Eleanor gathered every ounce of strength she had left. She grabbed a porcelain saucer from the crate next to her and threw it against the door. Smash. The sound of shattering pottery was sharp and loud in the silence. The footsteps stopped. Then they came thundering down the corridor toward her. In here, the man shouted. Is someone in there? Locked, Eleanor managed to say, her voice trembling. They locked me in. The handle jiggled violently. Stand back, the man commanded. Eleanor slumped sideways, away from the door. There was a grunt of effort, a heavy thud, and the sound of wood splintering. Then another thud. The old lock, rusted and brittle from the cold, gave way with a screech of metal. The door flew open. Light flooded the room, not moonlight, but the warm, yellow glow of a lantern held high. Standing in the doorway was a giant of a man. He was wearing a heavy greatcoat dusted with fresh snow. His dark hair was windblown, and his face was flushed from the cold. But his eyes were burning with intensity. It was the Duke, Alexander Hawthorne. He looked around the miserable little room, his gaze landing on Eleanor, huddled on the floor amidst the dirty canvas and broken china. Her lips were blue, her skin as pale as the snow outside. The anger on his face vanished, replaced by pure horror. Good God, he breathed. He dropped the lantern onto a crate and fell to his knees beside her. He didn't care about the dust or the dirt ruining his fine clothes. He pulled off his gloves instantly, pressing his warm hands against her freezing cheeks. My lady, he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and relief. Can you hear me? Look at me. Eleanor blinked slowly. Your Grace? She whispered. You came. I came, he said firmly. He began unbuttoning his heavy coat. And I am not leaving. He wrapped his massive coat around her, the wool still holding his body heat. It enveloped her like a warm cloud. Then, without hesitating, he slid his arms under her legs and behind her back. Hold on to me, he commanded gently. He lifted her up as if she weighed nothing at all. Eleanor rested her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating fast and strong, a drumbeat of life against her frozen ear. Who did this? He asked, his voice low and dangerous as he turned to carry her out of the icy prison. They went to the party, Eleanor murmured, her eyes closing again. The Duke's jaw tightened. Rest now, Eleanor. You are safe. I swear on my life, you are safe. Waking up felt like floating on a cloud. Eleanor expected the hard, cold stone floor, but instead, she felt softness underneath her and warmth on top of her. She opened her eyes. She wasn't in the storage room. She wasn't even in her own small, drafty bedroom at Wickham House. She was in a room she didn't recognize. The ceiling was high and painted with faint clouds. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn, blocking out the winter light, but a fire was roaring in a marble fireplace, casting a golden glow over everything. She tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy and tired. "Easy now, my dear. Don't rush." An older woman with kind eyes and a starched white apron hurried over to the bedside. She was holding a tray with a steaming cup. "Where am I?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was scratchy. "You are at Ashford House," the woman said, smiling gently. "I am Mrs. Graythorne, the housekeeper. His Grace brought you here last night. He carried you in himself. Wouldn't let the footman touch you. He was quite frantic, I must say." Ashford House, the Duke's home. Eleanor's eyes widened. "The Duke, is he?" "He's been pacing the hallway outside your door for 6 hours, Mrs. Graythorne said with a chuckle. "I finally told him he had to sit down or he'd wear a hole in the carpet. Here, drink this. It's beef broth. You need to warm up from the inside out." The broth was delicious. As Eleanor drank, the memories of the night before came rushing back. The cold, the fear, and then him. The way he had looked at her, not with pity, but with fierce protection. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Graythorne straightened her apron. "That will be him now. Are you up for a visitor?" Eleanor nodded, smoothing her hair self-consciously. She must look terrible. The door opened, and Alexander Hawthorne stepped in. He looked different than he had the night before. He was wearing a fresh suit, clean and pressed, but he looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept at all. When he saw her sitting up, his shoulders visibly relaxed. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since yesterday. "Lady Eleanor," he said, walking to the foot of the bed. He stopped there, respectful of her space. "I cannot express how relieved I am to see you awake." "Your Grace," Eleanor said, bowing her head slightly. I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." "I did what any decent man would have done," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "Though it seems decent men are in short supply in your household." He pulled a chair closer and sat down. "I must ask you, why were you there?" "I went to your home because your stepmother arrived at the gala without you. She claimed you were ill with a fever, but something about her story, it didn't sit right with me. She looked too happy, too triumphant." Eleanor looked down at her hands. "She didn't want me at the gala. She said I would embarrass them. Then Marianne and Judith tricked me into the storage room to get lanterns. They locked the door." Alexander's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "They left you," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "They didn't think I would die," Eleanor said quickly, trying to rationalize it. "They just wanted to make sure I couldn't follow them." "It does not matter what they thought," Alexander snapped. Then he softened, looking at her. "Recklessness that leads to death is no different than murder. Eleanor, if I hadn't come..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I sent a physician to check on you while you slept. He says you will recover fully, though you must rest for a few days. But I also sent my solicitor to look into your father's records." Eleanor frowned. "My father's records? Why?" "Because," Alexander said, his eyes locking onto hers, "a man who loved his daughter as much as Lord Wickham did would never leave her at the mercy of a woman like Agatha without protection. I suspect, Lady Eleanor, that you have been lied to about more than just lanterns." Eleanor felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just warmth. It was hope. For the first time, she wasn't just the poor, forgotten stepdaughter. She had an ally, and he was the most powerful man in the county. "Rest now," Alexander said, standing up. "I have matters to attend to. But know this, you will never be locked in the dark again. Not while I draw breath." News traveled fast in London, but scandal traveled faster. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. The Duke of Ashford had stormed out of the charity gala, ridden through the snow to Wickham House, and carried Lady Eleanor out in his arms. The servants at Ashford House whispered about it in the hallways. Eleanor heard snippets of their conversations. Found her freezing. Wicked stepmother. Arrest them all. But inside the library of Ashford House, the atmosphere was serious. 2 days had passed, and Eleanor was strong enough to leave her room. She wore a dress provided by Mrs. Graythorne, a simple but beautiful blue velvet that matched her eyes. She sat across from Alexander at a massive oak desk. Between them lay a stack of documents. "It is worse than I thought," Alexander said, pushing a paper toward her. "This is your father's last will and testament." Eleanor picked it up, her hands trembling. "Agatha told me there was no will. She said father died suddenly, and the estate automatically went to her as his wife." "A lie," Alexander said flatly. "Your father filed this with a lawyer in the city 3 years ago. It states clearly that upon his death, the house, the fortune, and the title deeds passed to you, Eleanor. Agatha was to receive a small yearly allowance, provided she cared for you properly." Eleanor gasped. "She stole it. All of it." "She hid the will," Alexander corrected. "And by treating you as a servant in your own home, she violated the conditions of her allowance. Technically, she has no right to a single penny." Eleanor stared at the paper. Tears blurred her vision. It wasn't about the money. It was about her father. He hadn't forgotten her. He hadn't left her unprotected. He had tried to ensure she was safe. "She made me feel so small," Eleanor whispered. "She made me believe I was a burden, that I was lucky she even kept me in the house." Alexander stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped beside her chair. He didn't touch her, but his presence was like a shield. "You are not a burden, Eleanor," he said softly. "You are a survivor. You endured their cruelty with grace. Most people would have broken. You remained kind." He looked out the window toward the garden, where the snow was beginning to melt in the sun. "I have summoned the magistrate. They are going to Wickham House this afternoon to execute the warrant. Agatha and your stepsisters will be removed from the property. They will face charges for fraud and for endangerment of life." Eleanor looked up at him. And then, he turned back to her. "The house is yours. You can return there. You will be the mistress of your own fate. No one will ever tell you what to do again." Eleanor should have felt happy. She should have felt triumphant. But the thought of going back to that big, empty house alone made her chest ache. She looked at Alexander. Over the last 2 days, she had seen a side of him the world didn't know. He wasn't just the stern Duke. He was the man who read by the fire while she rested. He was the man who made sure her tea was sweetened exactly how she liked it. I suppose I should be going then," she said, her voice faltering. "If the house is mine." Alexander's expression fell. The fierce determination left his eyes, replaced by a sudden vulnerability. "Yes," he said. "I suppose you should. Propriety dictates it. It would be scandalous for you to remain here now that you are well." He took a step closer, then stopped himself. "Unless," Eleanor asked, holding her breath. "Unless you do not wish to be alone," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "Eleanor, I have spent my life surrounded by people who want things from me. Money, titles, influence. When I found you in that room, when I saw how you fought to stay alive, I realized I had never met anyone so strong. And these past few days," he looked at her, really looked at her. "I find that the thought of this house without you in it is far colder than the winter outside." Eleanor stood up. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm and rough. "I do not want to go back there," she admitted. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Then don't," Alexander said, his grip tightening on her hand. "Stay. Not as a guest. Stay as the person I cannot imagine my life without." The scandal of the Wickham family was the talk of London for months. When the magistrate arrived at Wickham House, Agatha tried to scream and demand her rights. She claimed it was all a mistake, that Eleanor was a liar. But when they produced the hidden will found in Agatha's own jewelry box, she went silent. "Agatha, Marianne, and Judith were stripped of their finery. They were sent to live in a small, drafty cottage on the edge of the moors, far away from society. It was said that they had to chop their own wood to keep warm. Eleanor took no joy in their suffering, but she felt a profound sense of justice. They were finally feeling the cold they had forced upon her. But Eleanor didn't think about them much. She had better things to focus on. 3 months later, the snow had melted completely, replaced by the bright green buds of spring. The chapel at Ashford estate was filled with flowers, white lilies, yellow daffodils, and sprigs of heather. Eleanor stood at the entrance of the chapel. She wasn't wearing a gray, worn-out dress. She was wearing silk, the color of cream, embroidered with silver thread that caught the sunlight. Mrs. Graythorne stood behind her, adjusting her veil. "You look beautiful, my dear. Truly, I feel lighter," Eleanor said, smiling. "Like I've been carrying a heavy weight for years, and someone finally took it off." "That is what love does," the housekeeper said, patting her shoulder. "It shares the load." The music began a joyous, soaring melody. Eleanor stepped into the chapel. The pews were packed. Everyone wanted to see the Winter Duchess, the woman who had survived the ice. But Eleanor didn't look at the crowd. She didn't care about the gossip or the whispers anymore. She only had eyes for the man standing at the altar. Alexander looked magnificent in his formal dress coat, but his expression was the same one he had worn in the library, open, honest, and full of adoration. When he saw her, his whole face lit up. As she reached him, he didn't wait for the priest to start. He reached out and took her hands, holding them tightly. "You are warm," he whispered, a private joke between them. "I am," she whispered back. "I always will be now." The ceremony was beautiful, but the best part came afterward. When they stepped out of the chapel doors, the spring breeze was gentle. The crowd cheered, throwing flower petals into the air. Alexander pulled her close, his arm around her waist, protective, solid, permanent. "Are you ready, Duchess?" he asked, looking down at her. Eleanor looked back at the house, Ashford House. It wasn't a gallery of her diminished place. Like her old home, it was a fortress, a sanctuary, a home. "I am ready," she said. And as the Duke kissed her, right there on the steps for all the world to see, Eleanor Wickham realized that the winter was truly over. She had been left to freeze, intended to be forgotten in the dark. But instead, she had stepped into the light, and she would never be cold again.